Dogs Central, Graham Coffey joins us. We've had Graham on before, even back when Baylor and Georgia met in the Sugar Bowl, which was, 3 years ago? Is that right? Yeah, it was 3 years ago, and Georgia tied them up like a pretzel. We saw then what they were about to become. Thanks for your time, Graham. We appreciate it. Let's start with the Dylan Raiola commitment. He was committed to Ohio State. You and I both know, everyone does, that Nebraska got heavily involved because of the lineage, but Georgia came steamrolling down the track. Your thoughts about the Raiola commitment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for Georgia, you just won back-to-back national titles, and I think there were some people kind of maybe rival fan bases hoping to see some sign that there's going to be a downward trajectory, and then they go and sign the number one player in the 2024 class, probably the best quarterback prospect we've seen in a few years. And now the domino effect starts, right, of all the skill position players who are going to want to play with him. And it's interesting when you look at what Georgia's done the last 2 years. They've done it with Stetson Bennett, who was, he was a fourth-round draft pick, right? Like, he's a talented kid, but this is going to be the first time since Justin Fields spent 1 year on campus in Athens that Kirby Smart's had a truly elite quarterback prospect under center. And it's going to be interesting because Georgia already has that commitment to line of scrimmage football. We know that they're going to be strong in the trenches. We know they're going to be physical. And then you add in some of the flash. It'll be quite they could become kind of juggernaut level when you realize last year the leading wide receiver on the team was former three-star Lad McConkey, who had one Power 5 offer. The talent influx that's coming offensively in Athens is going to be something that's been different than anything we've seen so far under Kirby Smart.
Graham, so the plan at quarterback right now is Carson Beck. Looks like he's the leader in the clubhouse out of spring. That means Brock Vandergrift, who was a pretty highly recruited player, is he more on the clock than anyone else on that roster?
I think so. I think that's fair to say. But at the same time, he didn't have a great spring game, but he apparently had a pretty good spring practice session. Over the 15 practices, they felt pretty pleased with where he was. I think for the first time in his career, they kind of felt like he has a pretty good grasp on the offense. And so I think that's going to be the thing that he will have to weigh out after the 2023 season, because I would imagine Raiola is probably going to be early enrollee, so they'll both be there together during bowl practice with a chance to kind of size one another up. And Raiola is definitely going to be the more talented player, but can Vandergrift kind of use the experience that he will have had, I think 3 years in the program at that point. Can he use that to maybe buy himself a year as starter before Raiola kind of takes over? And you've also got Ryan Puglisi coming in, who's a very good quarterback in his own right. He's a five-star quarterback according to some of the recruiting services, and he's coming in with Raiola too. So I do think Vandergrift would be the natural one to leave, but there's a lot of people that thought he was going to leave after spring practice, and he's decided to stay. So it'll be interesting to monitor.
We here in Waco, Matthew Stafford, who obviously played at Georgia, won a Super Bowl with the Rams, played at Highland Park High School in Dallas. He was in town. He was inducted into the Texas High School Football Hall of Fame. It's kind of a procedure. I'm a part of that. And it made me think, and they were good when he was there, but Stetson Bennett, was he among the last 5 or 7, 8, 9, 10 years the least most heralded quarterback that started at Georgia, and then he's the one that wins the national titles?
Yeah, pretty much. Jake Fromm was he was a top 50 recruit in the country. You had a lot of guys. Aaron Murray was a 5-star quarterback, kind of took over from Stafford. There's been plenty of talent at that position, but yeah, it was Stetson Bennett who was the guy that was able to finally break the door down. And Bennett was very good, but I think also that happened because sort of what was around him and more importantly, how they used it. And I think early in the Kirby Smart era, you saw the offense, sometimes it functioned more to protect the defense than anything else. And when he hired Todd Monken and went through that process of sort of modernizing his offense and modernizing some of their run schemes. They went from almost all the way zone scheme on the run and then went 50-50 gap and zone, and that gave them some options in football games where, you go back to the 2021 Alabama National Championship game, like that offensive line was struggling to run the football, and in the second half they started running some gap scheme and they got things going. And so I think early in the Kirby era, it was like, let's just go be bigger than everyone else and let's possess the football. Let's not turn it over. Let's not take risks. And I think eventually they've kind of come around to this spot where maybe the best way to protect our defense is to have an offense that can go and win a shootout with a team like Ohio State, right? And so I think Stetson being there for that moment and for Todd Monken really modernizing Georgia's offense was kind of the thing that allowed him to be the one to finally succeed.
Graham Coffey, DogCentral.com with us on 365 Sports. Paul?
So last year on the defensive side of the ball, Dan Lanning goes to Oregon. They don't really miss a beat and roll through there. This year, Todd Monken on his way to Baltimore as the Ravens offensive coordinator. Mike Bobo comes back. Do you expect much of a change? Is this kind of, and also schedule-wise, is this maybe a good schedule for them to slightly transition to a new offensive coordinator? I know Mike Bobo was there on staff last year anyway, and they'll have a new quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I think when Bobo was hired, I was told that him becoming the OC was about two things. The first thing was continuity, and he was there on staff as an analyst last season. Todd Monken himself at the Broyles Awards ceremony said, the first two touchdown plays that we called against LSU in the SEC title, those were Mike Bobo's plays. He came up with them in our offensive meetings that week from things he saw in LSU's defense. So he's been there and he has the same terminology. I think that was the big thing was keeping the terminology. And I think what's interesting is Kirby Smart kind of maybe going the same route that Nick Saban went a while ago at Alabama when Lane Kiffin left, where if you get hired to be the OC at Georgia, you're kind of coming in to run the Georgia offense, and you're going to put some of your fingerprints on it. You're going to add your own wrinkles to it. You'll have some concepts that you like more than others, but the base system, the base terminology is all going to stay the same. And I think Kirby's logic there is pretty good, which is let's make one guy learn a new language instead of making everyone in our offensive football team have to, learn a new playbook and go through all of that. So I think from a continuity standpoint, you'll see a lot of the same stuff. But, I mean, Mike Bobo, there's some things about him that I'm sure will shine through. There's things he likes to do, in the screen game that will look different. I'm very interested to see sort of, what we actually can glean from the start of that schedule, because it is pretty cupcake-ish. So I don't know if we'll see anything other than just really vanilla-based offense. But they do go to Auburn on the road in the end of September, and I think that's probably the first chance that we'll get to really have a good idea of what the offensive identity is going to be under Bobo.
Yeah, and this was the year, was it not? They were supposed to play Oklahoma. Was it?
It was. Yeah, they were.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were going to go to Norman, I believe, in week 2, and with Oklahoma coming to the SEC, the league advised Georgia to not play that game because they were not going to get the return trip on the contract. So yeah, it's led to a lot of takes about Georgia having a weak schedule, which is fair to a certain extent, but they've opened with Oregon last year, opened with Clemson the year before. I believe they open with Clemson again next year in Atlanta. So they've done a pretty good job of scheduling some of these marquee out-of-conference games.
Graham, one more thing. We know, everyone knows it's been a really rough off-the-field offseason for Georgia. How much did that kind of rock things a little bit? And is it almost like every time you wake up and hear the news that you're worried about what might be going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where, you come off a back-to-back national championship parade and literally that night, into the next morning, you have this tragic accident that takes 2 young lives. And then the guy who was the best player on the team that just won the national championship, you find out he's out there racing. And yeah, it's been a lot of bad news after bad news. I think things have settled down a little bit. I think there's the difference between mistakes that young people make and, a rampant culture issue. Georgia, they're going to discipline folks for making mistakes. And I know for a fact that Kirby Smart has taken all of this very seriously, that before he sent his players on spring break, he was imploring them and, literally yelling at them, in a team meeting of like, do not get behind the wheel of a car, whether, you've been drinking or someone else has been drinking, like, find a way to get home, get an Uber or whatever. But if you're of the age to partake in alcoholic beverages and you're out and about, you got to do it safely. And I think it really has been an emotional thing for him. And I think that he's kind of taken some of it personally, right? These coaches, they go into living rooms and they promise people's parents that they're going to treat their kids like their own. And, I think this is something that's weighed heavy on him. And I know it's weighed heavy on everybody at Georgia from the top down with the administration and the athletic department. And so, yeah, it's definitely a time where you don't want any more bad headlines. And then at the same time, you also have the good stories mixed into that as well that, maybe don't see as much press or
Sure.
whatever. So it's a strange time though. I mean, I was talking to someone about this last week who's just a diehard Georgia fan. They were just like, it's weird to have all this success after 40 years of kind of being in the wilderness, so to speak. And then you sort of have this black cloud over everything. And I think having the spring game and just having things like Raiola commit, like just good headlines and having actual football to sort of move things forward is normalizing things. But honoring the lives of Devin Willock and Chandler LaCroix is going to be something that is happening around that program, I would think, for years to come.
Graham, great stuff. Thanks for jumping on with us today. Appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Always enjoy it.
Yes, sir. You too, Graham. CopyDogsCentral.com and